Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. Wanted to kind of go over my position a little bit better because I don't think some people understand what I mean when I talk about audience relevance and the fact that Jesus returned in the first century like he said he would. Um, there is an audience to this text, and instead of looking at this audience, we as the modern church just insert our own future audience. We are literally told in the text who is being spoken to at that time. And we're going to see this clearly with some of the text I'm going to read. But Paul's letters were addressed to literal people. When Jesus was talking to people, he was talking to people and they were listed in the text. Um, And why do I believe that Jesus came back in judgment on Jerusalem and is not coming back in our future? Well, the reason I believe that is because Christ told us in the text. I'm strictly going off, I'm not using Gnostic books here. I'm not using somebody's commentary on the subject. I have only strictly gone off of what the text itself says. So, if you want to know what the text says, you need to read the text by itself, okay? Now, I want to start here in Matthew 23:29 through 36, and this gives us a beautiful picture of what Christ's intent was for when he returned. This is the same judgment language we see all throughout the Old and New Testament. In Matthew 23:29, Christ says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites." Okay, right off the bat, we know who the audience is. Christ tells us this is not for your future. This is not for anybody else's future. He was speaking to the people he was speaking to, and it's in the text. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we lived in the days of our fathers," does that sound familiar? They, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. "Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets." Remember what we talked about. These are the descendants of these Old Testament Jewish people. Christ tells us right here, "Fill up the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send prophets to you, and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town." And we know they did that. They killed the apostles. They killed Christ, right? Who were all prophets sent by God. So that you may come, so that on you may come the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel. Remember we talked about that. Abel was the first. To the blood of Zachariah, son of Berechiah, who was what? Father of John the Baptist, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you. Now who was Christ talking about here? The scribes and the Pharisees, right? He said it in the very beginning. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. He wasn't talking about a future generation. This ain't a future coming Israeli civilization or something. He was talking to the literal people who were the descendants of these Old Testament people. Okay. Um, Now some of the, hold on, I messed up. Now this whole thing comes from Matthew 23, right, where Jesus was clearly rebuking the scribes and Pharisees during his final week in Jerusalem. And the key we want to see here is they will fill up the measure of their father's guilt. And we talked about this. These are nothing more than descendants of the Old Testament Jews. And Jewish idiom to fill up the measure means to complete, finish, bring fullness, a pattern of behavior that had already started. So this was the finishing line for this, right? Christ was going to finish this, and this sounds so familiar all throughout the New Testament. This is what Jesus is saying. Their ancestors persecuted and killed God's prophets, like Elijah, Isaiah, Zechariah. Name a prophet. The scribes and Pharisees claim they would have not done the same. But Jesus tells them that they will, in fact, finish what their fathers started. They will complete the pattern of rebellion. Jesus explicitly ties this to the events about to unfold. And we talked about this. The whole lot of the New Testament is leading up to this judgment on them, right? And we see it starting to unfold right here. Christ tells them this judgment is coming upon them. So why we would say this is 2,000 years in our future just blows my mind. I don't understand why we would do that. He tells them these events are going to unfold, that they would kill him, that they would persecute him and the apostles and prophets, and the final act would be filling up the measure of covenantal guilt that had accumulated from the previous generations. And we talked about this. And he concluded by saying all these things will come upon this generation. Now this has, as a preterist, this has a very big significance to us, because this shows Israel's covenantal judgment. Remember, the Jews believed in this two-age model. The age they lived in and the age to come, which we now live in, which was coming upon them on that time. And this all concluded with the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus teaches that generation would complete the pattern of rejection, kill the Messiah and his messengers, and then receive those covenantal curses that were prophesied by prophets like Daniel. Remember in the Olivet Discourse, when Jesus says, you will see the abomination of desolation prophesied by the prophet Daniel. Well, if you go to Daniel, you can see this where he prophesied this. Now, I wanted to go back and kind of show, now that we laid that groundwork, kind of show what I'm talking about with Christ's return. Christ's return was a judgment return, and he says this all throughout when he talks in the New Testament. If we go back, there are many Bible passages that show Christ's imminent coming. And this is what I mean. This does not take away from what Christ did on the cross. We all acknowledge that Christ died, he was buried, he rose on the third day, and he sat down at the right hand of the Father, right? This is how you are saved, not by anything that you believe Christ is doing in the future. If that were the case, then there's been a lot of men, if your hope is in what Christ is going to do in the future, there's been a lot of men and women, millions of Christians over the years that have come and gone thinking Christ is coming back, and he hasn't. So therefore they have no hope, right? Because they put their hope in a future return, when our hope should be in what Christ did on the cross. I want to look at a few of these texts yet again, to show that Christ's return was imminent to the people he was speaking to. In Matthew 24:34, he says, this generation will not pass away till all these things are fulfilled. And again, we went over what are all these things. He laid it out for the disciples on the Mount of Olives, right? This generation refers to Jesus' contemplative generation, making this fulfillment before 70 AD, right? He wasn't talking about a future far-off generation. And nowhere in Matthew 24:25, which is the entire Olivet Discourse, is there mentioned a future generation. Jesus is talking to the disciples the entire time. Matthew 16:27 through 28. There be some standing here whom shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay? So there's no way to take this in our future. Jesus told them that some standing there would not taste death till they see the man coming in the kingdom. Now, if I come up to you and I said, there are some of you standing here who will not die before they see me jump 5 buses on a motorcycle 1,000 years from now, would that be believable? Absolutely not, because none of us are going to be living in 1,000 years. So that would be utterly ridiculous. And that's what we try to do with these texts. We try to say, oh, he wasn't talking to people who was standing there at that time. He was talking to people who were standing there when they read this 2,000 years in the future, which is so ridiculous. Matthew 10:23. You will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Okay, remember, if we read the Olivet Discourse and all its variations, we will see this Israel-Jerusalem connection that Jesus was making. And this just indicates that there would be a coming within the apostles' missionary time frame. We went over Revelation, okay? We could see here in the beginning, right here in Revelation 1, these things must shortly come to pass. The time is near, okay? And if we go all the way to Revelation 22, we see that the Lord's, he says, John says yet again, the Lord God sent his angels to show his servants what must soon take place. Do not seal up this book. My coming is soon. Yes, I am coming soon. Soon, by any measure of the imagination, is not 2,000 years. So we have 2 bookends here of Revelation that tell us that whatever was written down in this book was coming place soon. Now remember, we're 2,000 years away from Christ, okay? That is over twice as long as Babylon was from Christ's birth. Yet when we read the prophecies during that time frame, they say stuff like seal up the book. It's a ways off. Things of that nature, indicating that there was going to be a huge time gap between these Old Testament prophecies and the fulfillment in the New Testament. But here we see that this stuff is coming soon. And remember, if you say this is 2,000 years in the future, you are making it up. Did you not go to school? Soon is not 2,000 years. I don't care who you are, what language you have. Nobody would say soon within a couple 1,000-year period. There's no way. James 5:7-9. The coming of the Lord is at hand. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. This text had an audience, and you and I are not it, right? He was telling them that the Lord was at hand and the judge was standing at the door. 1 Peter 4:7. The end of all things as at hand, okay? When we say we have something at hand, it means we have it with us, right? We would never in a million years say we have something at hand and it's 5 states over, okay? And this is the same thing here. He would not have told them that it was at hand if it wasn't soon, because he's telling them it's at hand to them, right? All these texts have an original audience, and we should not ignore that audience in favor of our own presuppositions. And many of those we get from the creeds and confessions that I talked about, right? Because we see, oh, it says here that Christ is coming back in our future. Remember, these people were not inspired Bible writers. We have the text right here. Read the text. Hebrews 10:37, yet a very little while. Now you need to read this in its original language. Yet a very little while, and he who is coming will come and will not delay. Okay? 2,000 years is a delay, guys. It don't matter how you stack it and look at it. 2,000 years is a delay. He's saying here, he is coming very soon and will not delay. Romans 13:11-12. And our salvation is nearer. The day is at hand. Again, we see this at hand, right? Okay. Some of the stuff about the fall of Jerusalem. We've already went over this Matthew 23 when he's talking to the Pharisees, right? Uh, Jesus was talking about a covenant judgment here, not a physical descent. And we know this by looking at the Old Testament language that says the exact same thing as what he's saying here. In Matthew 24, it describes all the events, the wars, the tribulation, the abomination of desolation, the Son of Man coming in the clouds. This is all said to occur by Jesus before that generation passed, okay? And he was only talking to one generation. There is no other generation in the text. People like to chop the Olivet Discourse up, but the truth is, he was talking to one particular people the whole time, and they're named in the text. Okay? Luke 21:20 through 38 describes that when you see the Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Okay? So this explicitly connects the coming with the Roman siege. Okay? They are the ones that saw, go back and read your history, on the siege of Jerusalem, just like I said, in that war, they were surrounded by armies. Okay, and the only ones that escaped Jerusalem were the believers that Christ told in advance to flee the city. And I want to go back on this coming on the cloud stuff we talked about. I want to emphasize that coming on the clouds is not necessarily a bodily, but a symbolic judgment. And we don't just pull this out of the air. We know this by looking at the Old Testament. In Matthew 26:64, he says, "You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven." And he addressed this directly to the Sanhedrin, meaning that they would witness his coming. Remember, the audiences are all over the book. You just need to look for them. So he told the Sanhedrin directly that they would see him coming in the clouds. This is just Old Testament imagery rehashed. Remember what we talked about. Jesus and Paul said they taught nothing but the law and the prophets. This is just the law and the prophets that they taught. They wasn't making up new stuff for a new generation in the New Testament. They were teaching nothing but what the Old Testament, got the hiccups. They were teaching nothing but what the Old Testament taught. Isaiah 19:1, God says, God comes on a swift cloud to judge Egypt. Joel chapter 2, the day of the Lord as a cloud, darkness, and judgment. And this is just an idea of covenantal judgment. Okay? Not a literal descent. He did not literally descend. He judged them. So why would we take this Old Testament covenant judgment imagery and try to apply it to a literal coming and setting up of a kingdom of Christ in our future? It just doesn't make sense. Okay? Remember, the Bible is fluid. It has one consistent theme from start to finish. And when we hack it up like this, we do nothing but make it confusing. We make it so people cannot understand it. But if you read it in its context to the audience it was meant to be to, then it makes a whole lot of sense. I've talked about this over and over. The kingdom arrived in the first century. We believe that the coming included the arrival of the kingdom during that generation. Mark 9:1 says, "Some standing here shall not taste death till they see the kingdom of God with his power." So he told them. Why would we think the kingdom arrived in the first century? Because he told them that some standing there would not die until they saw it. I mean, this is like kindergarten level stuff. Hebrews 12:28, believers in the first century are receiving a kingdom. Go back and read Hebrews. You'll see that they were receiving the kingdom in their day. Colossians 1:13, he has delivered us and translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. This implies that the kingdom was already inaugurated during that time. All right, we're going to look at the judgment of that generation that Jesus talked about. as we talked about, Matthew 23, 35 through 36, all these things will come upon this generation. And we talked about that. They were filling up the measure of their father's guilt from Abel to Zechariah. Luke 11, 50 through 51. This generation will bear the judgment of the past prophet's blood. And we saw Jesus. He told the Pharisees this. They were going to bear the punishment. Okay? Now the end of the age. Jesus spoke about the end of the Jewish age, not the end of the world. The end of the world is nowhere in Scripture. Remember, they believed in the two-age model. I had to say this over and over because people are not getting it. The age that they currently lived in and the age to come, or the age of Messiah. Okay? The disciples in Matthew 24 ask about the end of the age. King James is a bad translation when it translates it to world. Go back. Like I said, you can do this for free. Compare these Bible translations side by side. Okay? And look at them and see what they actually say. A good translation for that text is the end of the age, not the end of the world. Okay? They was not thinking about the end of the world. They were thinking about the end of their age. And how do we get this? We read the Old Testament. That's what they were referring to. But the disciples asked about the end of the age immediately after Jesus predicts the temple's destruction. The temple that, by the way, they were looking at when he was making these predictions. 1 Corinthians 10:11, the end of the age have come upon us. Now this is Paul talking to the Corinthians, okay? He's telling them it's come upon us, right? He says it's already arrived in their lifetime. All right? Now these are a few imminence passages that show that this stuff was imminent to them at that time. And these are just ignored by futurists and dispensationalists. Because they do not fit their narrative. 1 John 2:18, it is the last hour, okay? The last hour to who? The last hour to them, the people being spoken to. Philippians 4:5, the Lord is near, okay? Revelation 6:15 through 17, the kings cry out saying the great day of his wrath has come. Remember, I told you. And we looked at Revelation is bookend by two statements of Christ coming soon. Okay? So whatever this was coming upon them, this wrath. And this is, like I said, it is nothing more than John's Olivet Discourse. Okay? Revelation is nothing more than John's version of the Olivet Discourse. And this would apply to AD 70. Now in summary, okay? The first century coming of Christ, the reason we get this is there are explicit timing statements. Soon, near, at hand. The judge is at the door. Those of you standing here will not taste death before you see this. And the audience relevance. He was speaking to his contemporaries, okay? Paul was speaking to his contemporaries. All the New Testament writers were speaking to the people that are literally addressed in the text. We do not have to wonder, okay, who these people are. They're listed in the text. And we see this covenantal judgment imagery, the coming on the clouds, etc. That just equals judgment. And we can go back to the Old Testament. We're not reading third-party books to figure this out. We can go back to the Old Testament and figure out what this coming on the clouds imagery actually means. And also the temple, the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. People do not understand how important the destruction of this temple was. Okay? Without this temple, you have no Judaism. Judaism ended when the temple fell. And the reason being is there's all these requirements, these laws that you have to follow in order to practice Judaism. And around a third of those laws require a temple. Sacrifices and things of that nature all require a temple, which has not been around in 2,000 years and will never be around again. Okay? And the reason being is because we live in the new kingdom, the new covenant created by Christ and inaugurated in the first century. And people ask, well, people say, well, you're taking away our hope. Well, I hope your hope is not in a future return of Christ. I hope that your hope is in what Christ already completed and finished on the cross. We believe this as a church. We sing songs about it, but yet certain people think their hope is in a future coming of Christ. No, it's not. Christ finished. He said on the cross he finished. Okay? So I hope that gives you a little bit clearer understanding about the position I take and why I believe Christ came back in judgment in the first century and set up this kingdom that we currently live in. Thanks for watching.